Yeah.
They come up and things like, oh, I like the concept of.
One thing that oh, go ahead.
Oh, no, I just.
We as a university, I was glad and great we're doing this kind of conversation, need to be excited and believe in the mission and all its kind of components. And I'll also plug along with David and Savannah. We're on the college committee for August, which is going to be about the Christian liberal arts and kind of getting excited about that. Some of the initiatives the Foundational Core Committee has been pursuing over the last 2 years, but is profoundly countercultural in many ways. And I don't think the country has necessarily ever embraced liberal arts as an ideal to strive for. And I don't think even now is anything different. Marsden says in his piece, most 18-year-olds need to be helped along with the fact that reading great literature and understanding the sciences are going to enrich their lives, right, in some kinds of ways. So I think this is all part of what we're doing as we're looking at the new demographics and new kind of markets, is the faculty and the university being on the same page and getting excited about what is distinct here and what is different. And yes, we want you to get a job at the end of the day, and I think our success rate would indicate that happens, but it's more than just going through a pipeline to get money at the end of the day. It has to be about that kind of inner transformation and character formation, but even integration of faith and learning and Christian doctrine kind of being part of that as well.
No, go ahead. I was going to switch to other things. So Timothy, you
Well,
can take
so was I. Well, I was sort of drawing.
Go ahead.
Sort of drawing a red from that idea to something else that we talked about. All institutions determining how we affirm our foundational beliefs without creating fences, and how it is that we live into that calling of firmly Christian liberal arts without falling into things that aren't our center, aren't the way that she writes about it, the idea that we would identify sensibilities and values that support our programs and pay less attention to the non-essential differences. That to me feels like it is front and center in the conversation about what type of gospel are we living out at a place like Taylor, while recognizing that they could go lots of other places, and there are lots of other places that are living out some other kind of gospel. What does Taylor's look like, and how does that fit within the broader conversation of higher education? I really have been wrestling with that since I read that line in the article.
If I can kind of segue to the next question. I remember.
Which is that hope or?
Hope.
Yeah, go ahead. I was just curious there.
I remember my first year. Yeah, I don't remember who it was, but sometime I don't think you can see anymore. It was just their speech was just very kids these days kind of attitude about they're waiting to get married till they're 25 and they're not having a kid. And I'm 29 and I just had my first kid, and I was kind of like, oh, I guess I'm bad that I'm have this lifestyle. But it seemed to me that it's very easy for us as faculty that when things change to have a dismissive or an upset attitude, or things are going to be bad, and like this is a bad thing. But in terms of talking about broadly about students just thinking just if I want to get a job, one thing that I think if we do it right and do it carefully, we tie in is the research that I've heard and read is that Gen Z is much more politically and socially active than millennials were kind of slacktivists, and this group is much more serious about broad social issues. And I think that to me that ties into this idea of wanting, like, they have values. Maybe they're not exactly in line with what we think the values should be, but a value-based education I think makes a lot of sense to somebody that is putting a lot of emphasis on values and not just on money. And so I think this generation value a values-based education in that sense. So I don't know how you market that easily or correctly. I think there's a lot of ways to screw that up. But I also think that kind of gives me hope that this generation is of the mind that we do want to take more than just, because their parents, a lot of them, I think, they kind of just think that you go to work, make the money, come home. I don't know how it works, kind of.
I think the articles also talk about though our constituency has kind of changed over the last 20 years. And that they want to be sure that they have the same values as their parents, and there's not going to be as much exploration for that. And so that's like building war fences, or maybe even a fortress mentality if we go back to homes. And so that's kind of the other challenge. How ecumenical can we be here, but also to parents as well? I mean, we don't want to destroy their faith. We want them to still have faith after they come. But we maybe want to have them develop as God wants to develop, maybe not. I don't want my daughters to have the same faith that I have, so to speak. So.
There's also a little bit of a point spec thing with just Taylor as a whole. I don't think that Taylor's values are its values of the user.
Yeah.
An example of that is we have statements requiring part of it. I mean, we've changed what we value, whether that's by culture influencing us or whatever it is. That reminds me.
It's kind of the second bullet point under where we place our hope. Oh, what was your experience in graduate school? I mean, she claims that we imported expectations of standardized excellence, intellectual neutrality, research agendas, disciplinary loyalty, and professionalization that do not always integrate well with the formation of character. What was your experience in graduate school? Was it sort of objective, so to speak, or any talk of character development in graduate school?
I can say I did a master's in English lit at a state university, so it was definitely not neutral. I mean, we were reading, this was back in the early OOs, and we were already spending a lot of time delving into various forms of critical theory. So I could tell professors generally very much had a perspective. So definitely not neutral, but maybe not in the direction that Taylor is necessarily talking about.
I literally have a faculty member in my master's who would stand in a room full of students and faculty and say, "You're Christian Scientists, you're an idiot." So that made me really, be open about my faith, right? In front of all of these people. And so I kind of hid my faith a little bit. Not that I was trying to, but if someone asked me, I would be honest, but I wasn't like as open as I can be here. And I also had my dissertation advisor for my PhD is Muslim. And so he was open about his faith and he was a Christian, so we kind of had that commonality, but people would ask him more questions about his faith. But yeah, that was my experience. Not good. So this thought process, I was like, oh yeah, I totally, yep, that sounds like it.
Well, how do you adjust from that to a place like Taylor, where character development, or I mean, what we say character development is important?
Yeah, it's been very liberating to me to be able to be more focused on what does my faith. Honestly, this past 3.5 years, I've grown exponentially in my faith because I've been able to be more vocal about it. I've been able to think about my faith and how does that actually integrate into my classroom. And I've had students, I mean, I'm open with the fact of being very, I guess, new to faith integration, but yeah, it's been refreshing. So I try to be open with my students about my experience so that they know that, you know what, after you leave Taylor's, you might actually be looked down upon if you're a Christian. Just to think about the secular world. This is kind of a safe haven right now. to be able to explore ideas, to think about it in different ways and think about your faith and maybe wrestle with it. What you actually believe, because you are going to be questioned in the real world.
And adding to that, that's one of the benefits of coming here is that our students do. I don't know, for some reason, I think that they come up with a mindset that our future is not clear in ministry. That regardless of what you go into, that's a ministry. And so if I'm in graduate school, it can be a ministry. It could be a very rough ministry to be in, but it is a ministry, and we have good examples of that. I think of a chapel speaker. I know his first name was Peter, but he came from the Middle East somewhere, Iraq maybe, where he serves. He was a computer scientist, but he went over there to teach English, and he's come and spoken several times. You know, he could be making tons of money as a computer scientist, but he's on support to some degree. He's working undercover. He couldn't even share his real name. And he really pushed the students to say, you know, use whatever you're given, but follow where God leads you. And I thought that was powerful.
One thread of catching with liberal arts, and what Savant experience, which I don't think is unique in graduate school, is that the power dynamic there kind of restricts freedom and makes the experience illiberal for you in terms of being able to explore it. But for us as students, at least in the math department, one part of our goal students when we're at Harvard is kind of elevating students and inverting that power dynamic, and so that they see themselves early on as a professional and scholar, and that gives them the freedom to kind of liberally explore their education. And so I think that that's kind of a key distinctive, and again, that's not something I know how to say to a prospective or advertise, but I do think that is unique about Christian liberal art education that's different than a stage on the stage type graduate school experience where they're right and wrong.
I feel like I had a fairly dynamic graduate experience. My advisor was a believer. Me to in some ways forget some of my more spiritual education at times in order to see something with fresh eyes, and at the same time do that with my whether it's my academic exploration or my spiritual exploration to try and see it from various perspectives, and that was very liberating. Which I'm sorry that you had that experience. I had a different experience where I asked a question in a seminar because the article that we were discussing was a critique of abstinence rhetoric in conservative Christian circles, and there was a comment about the author's point of view and whether or not a clearer grounding in that space might provide better understanding of the area. And this was with my advisor. She really called me out on what I was privileging in the conversation, and I saw that my spiritual life and my academic life didn't have to be, I was really separating them and placing that there couldn't be a truth that was discovered from different perspectives. That was really impactful. So my graduate experience was a little bit different.
And I guess I should say, there were several faculty members that were Christian, that I ended up, when I applied to Taylor, I talked to them, and I should have known you were Christian, like your actions and things like that. I was like, oh, but I mean, that's a huge compliment to be like, I don't have to be outward about it, but there were some, but just having the faculty understand it and say that, it was like, oh, okay, I guess I'll talk about that.
Yeah.
Go to the second page. I had written a lot of questions. out and try to eliminate them. I don't think I was in a good spot here when I wrote the 2 through 5. So pick any of the 2 through 5 you'd like to talk about, or stay with the one in Marsden. So any of those questions that you would like, the top of the page, sure.
Can you explain what you meant by question 3? I'm really interested.
She was talking about faith and integration papers for teaching. And so she said, well, maybe, so she was saying we need to have a clear mission. And if you have a clear mission, maybe we need a faith and administration paper and a faith and board of trustees mission statement. Maybe we're a little snarky on that, but.
I remember when I first came to Taylor 4 years ago as Clement and Selena, and I joined at the same time. Asking a question at that point in time, because I heard President Haynes at the time talk about how the board all recites the mission statement. And mission statement just goes over and over and over. When I was talking to the faculty, they couldn't tell me the mission statement, but they could tell me the LTC. And I asked, does the board sign the LTC? Is that as important as the mission statement? And I was told not to ask that question. And to me, the LTC, I think is different. The way faculty read it is so different than the way our students read it. I think in some ways about what we commit to each other being vitally important. And I see that as a significant part of my faith integration in the classroom and how I talk about different hard things while making allowances for other opinions. And so I don't know if we can simplify it to the life together question. But that stands out to me, so I remember asking that question. That's a good question to ask.
Well, great, but it gives it a power dynamic again, in terms of the, obviously here it's like, well, the administration or trustees is not doing it. It's not faithful, but it also, the administrators are the ones kind of imposing the life together covenant or whatever else we agree on. And one thing I struggled with the new statements are required is not really the content, but the language at the end that says something like, essentially, I'm paraphrasing, but essentially, this is my point of view forever. But I have a whole lot of different points of view from 20 years ago than I have now, and so it seems to lack space for growth. And so I struggle with the kind of imposition on some of the faith pieces, particularly when we've had such a on the board. It's kind of like who is actually imposing something that. There's more question that needs
I was always curious as to why we're doing a faith statement and a faith-based. Especially go back to the receptive, it seems to me like it's a hidden pothole. You gotta have to communicate all the time. Unless we specify one aspect and understanding of faith, and everybody else is not welcome. I don't really know why.
Well, there's danger in being too sectarian, and the history of fundamentalism shows some of that of endless infighting, endless splits. And there's a danger of being too broad. And actually, one of the lessons I think from Marsden's book is that when the purposes of these Protestant universities changed in the 19th century from training pastors and doctrinal emphasis to broadly moral formation and character development, the distinctly Christian part got diluted so that eventually by the early 20th century, there wasn't really much left for most of the Ivy Leagues, especially because that's what he's focusing on. That really resembled the purposes for which the universities had been founded. And they still did great research, they produced lots of great scholars. There was maybe still a Bible department or a lingering chapel requirement or not. But as the net was wider and wider and wider, then the actual purposes in the Christian formation was actually just diluted into just general do-goodism that blended in everything else in the culture. So there's always a danger of one side or the other. Taylor, I think, strives to hit the happy middle, not being just one denomination, but also not just anything vaguely theistic goes either, but some things in the middle. I think that's the purpose of continuous success.
Can we do that? Can we?
Yeah,
That's a big
it's not
old-
possible.
I think you're right. I think that's where we're striving. How do we do that? Can we do that?
It's a tough moment. I mean, evangelical worked for a long time. It comes with a lot of political baggage now. We had conversations when Mike Hammond was still here, I guess that was last year, 2 years ago already, about that language and keeping that, what constitutes evangelicalism, what constitutes evangelical. But I think the decision was, it still works enough theologically, but politically, of course, you know, we're just, you know, there's so much division in the church and without all that.
I don't think it's happening.
You said you don't believe there's happy middle?
Yeah, I don't think that. I think it's a deception.
That's fine.
Yeah, also, I think people are gonna have, I think a lot of people are gonna have very diverse understanding based on their experiences. And to come up with a middle would it always exclude something.
Well, does it have to be a skinny middle, or can it be a, that, you know what I'm saying?
It can be a middle, but it just won't be happy.
Well, that's, isn't that true for any place on the continuum? No.
Why don't do it with a happy?
I'm curious to hear from you all. It may be because of my discipline, but I imagine questions like this. I get a lot more questions from prospective parents about my political stance or the university's political stance than I do about our faith stance. And I have really wrestled with how to answer those questions with integrity, because I don't. If I feel like I've been made responsible for recruiting or retention, then that doesn't feel like a safe question to answer well. So even what the middle is feels like at least from some of my more recent conversations with prospective parents, there seems to be a
Interesting realignments in some ways, because in terms of what we want to push with the core, it's appreciation of the true, the good, the beautiful, faith integration, seeing God in all things, and in all aspects of life. We may find evangelicals to be more aligned with, say, a Roman Catholic or somebody who is Eastern Orthodox than somebody who's a Protestant, but more of a mainline liberal Protestant. So, but if you get into the evangelical identity, it's the point where we're starting to like nail down atonement theories and things like that as requirements, then you're kind of cutting out that other potential alliance. So that's.
I think the way I would answer that to a prospective parent is I would say that you're non-denominational. And that means that we have a broad set of people on campus, maybe not all equally represented, but we admit and embrace the fact that there's a tension between these viewpoints, and part of the goal for your student here is to create their own faith. Yeah, and that is wrestling with, not every professor believes the same, but we would believe that there's a tense, not that happy middle that they can that. But I remember Trump speakers using that word tension, which is probably overused, but or the kind of mystery of where you got at. And so I guess I don't know the new administration enough to know that they would support that kind of point of view, but that's what I would like to see, is a place where we have, a wide
influence.
And the students can- and they're not just finding that with each other, but they're finding that with us, and
Right.
that they see that we engage in that with one another.
And the most depressing thing I've been told recently by a student was, engagement student told me, when I think about my experience, I went to EIS, I think this is true for most college students. One of the biggest memories is being in your dorm and arguing with your roommates about whatever, late at night. Sometimes it's about Cheetos versus Fritos, but sometimes it's about the nature of God and, you know,
Just
one say, always say, yeah. And so, and I remember a student telling me, you know, I tried to have these conversations with my roommates, and they just shut the conversation down. And one of them, and another one said they had like a DA, like a floor-wide, you know, study group, whatever, and it was showing. That would never happen when I was in college. And so I think the divisiveness that Ben was talking about, I think that's kind of leading now into our student culture. I mean, I don't know if that's stopping you, I can scare that, but it's kind of killer.
I was just thinking, I guess particularly, we had used a document just to look at in our faith integration class. It was called like 99 Essential Doctrines. And I had to look at the publication. It was published by Crossway, which is of course Southern Baptist. And in those 99, it was giving a definition of baptism that was basically Credo Baptist. And I was thinking, well, that's not even just a Protestant thing. You've automatically cut out your Presbyterians, your Lutherans, Congregationalists. So that's in. I'm very sensitive to the liberal drift of the university, if we have to use those terms, because I've been at a Christian university who had gone much further that way. But I've also seen parts of conservative evangelicalism, quote unquote, that would start setting those kind of lines I was talking about, and that kind of makes me nervous for the goals of the university.
It's just even more polarized, so how do you address it? Because if this is the middle is getting further and further, or the cultural view is getting further and further. I mean, I work in a discipline that is viewed as inherently liberal, and I get called a liberal, and I'm like, you have no clue what I actually believe, right? Like, I'm sorry, if helping people and thinking about cultural and societal influences on health is liberal, but I think Jesus told us to care for people, so that's my underlying tone. But I got called out on the review and said that I think Professor Bielko is pushing a liberal agenda, and I'm like, what? No! Did you show up to class? But yeah, I mean, even in disciplines, they're getting labeled.
Do our students or perspectives understand the difference between liberal arts and liberal politics?
I don't think so. I don't think so.
I have in mind, I think we should be using a different word for liberal arts. What you said, but
It's all twisted, because I mean, what was traditionally neoliberalism, we associate more with conservatives.
One
this is
question.
making us impressed.
That's all right. We're supposed to have hope. We're supposed to be energized and help build character within our students, but we'll have one more depressing question, and that was Marsden's response to all of the articles before. And he kind of pointed out that maybe the predator is not liberalism, or secularism, sorry. It may be economic pressures. And will the distinctive Christian liberal arts vision collapse under economics pressure? So you got 2 or 3 here, defend yourselves. No.
I can't imagine that every Christian institution in Indiana will still be intact 30 years from now.
Well, that's what they say, 20,
I was gonna say 30.
20%.
I was just trying to get to my retirement.
Okay.
I mean, if we measure college as preparation for the job market, then where does the humanities, the arts fit into that? So we either have to find a way. So
I think some universities will pay, and I mean, there's evidence for that. We've seen it historically, that universities do pay due to economic pressure. So in order to meet the economic pressure, we're going to drift from our mission, and we're going to change what we believe in, and it happens. And we've seen what's happened in history, but then there are others that are more willing to fight. There are some around that are extremely conservative, that won't even accept, government funding, in order to, and yet they still survive. And I think that it can go either way, but there are going to be some that will pay.
There will be some that fall apart for a variety of reasons. There will be some that persist. I think because one of these writers said there will always be a market for parents and students who value the Christian liberal arts. But or maybe this brand study will help us with this, but promoting, explaining what that is and the value of it, both in terms of dollars and cents, as the humanities and arts open lots of doors to careers rather than closing them. But also in terms of that lifelong learning experience that Sylvana was mentioning, thinking robustly as a Christian citizen in an increasingly divided world, and talking about how your classes in political science and history and public health and all kinds of disciplines are going to help you flourish as a human being. There will be something for that. And we trust that God's sovereignty will prevail in this too, and that he's been faithful to Taylor for 175 years, and if we remain faithful to him, I think he'll remain faithful to us.
I think one thing about the humanities and arts specifically is that if you decide that we need to go the job market question right now, there's going to be a STEM institution, then we have nothing distinctive over Roosevelt or Troy, and we're charging twice as much. So I think that's the way to cut yourself into.
It's kind of interesting that he emphasizes we have to keep the liberal arts at the core of education as a priority. But to do that, you need money. To need alumni to continue to send us money. So money is the answer to the problem.
But it can also be the point where, I mean, if students don't expect, I mean, some of the expectations that students, even parents have for a university are, the sparkle and the glow rather than the heart of what it is. If they want the sparkle, then you've got to have the fancy dining commons and multiple, and it could be done without all of that. The education could be done without all of the sparkle, but it is a battle. It is a battle that we have to face.
Do you have examples of how you can build up our Christian liberal arts in your classes? I think one of the challenging for me was, oh yes, I do find myself only talking about what jobs and what money you can get. And I'll talk also about my discipline, about how it helps you grow, but I don't know if I do as well talking about the other disciplines as much as I used to, and how they can help you grow and develop and provide better character, be a better servant of God. Any strategies that way?
Something that I don't do and we could do is, if we believe our foundation of core has these 6 areas, and that's kind of what we emphasize. Maybe I don't know exactly what they're doing in some foundation of core course, but when I bring up aesthetic literacy or whatever it is, if we can hit those and remind you like these are the unifying things in your education, then when they hear those same, that is the same concept, that this is just another angle of like aesthetic literacy that from math class versus from this class. That's really supposed to be the thread that ties the core together. I don't use that.
If we knew a little more what we were doing in some of the other foundational core courses, we could maybe brag on each other, help students make the connections. What we say is important.
Now we have to revise.
But the only
This is all been applied.
we can still use another committee member.
When we redesigned the foundational core class 2 years ago, we introduced an objective in the course that's specific to what students would develop a fundamental understanding of where the impact of communication in their desired field of study. There's an assignment at the very end of the course where they interview somebody working in a field or industry they want to work in someday, and then they talk to each other about where they see a connection from course content to their areas. And that is the favorite assignment all semester, not just because they learn about their desired field, but they learn about each other's desired field. And that to me feels like, oh, that's the liberal arts. That's connections, exponential connections, because it's not just how I'm making a connection, but making a connection to someone else's connection. And that has been incredible. I love that assignment in our students too. So that's one way that I suppose a positive that I can say, this is where I see the way that I can help support that liberal arts. Questions, I think.
We'll end on that one then. That's a nice higher point than some of the other sort of. So thank you very much for coming, and there's more sandwiches, more cookies.
Yes.
Good input. Take some more, but thank you all for coming.
Thank you, these articles.